Jacques Georges Brel was born on April 8, 1929 at 4:15 a.m. in a large bourgeois house at 138, Avenue Van Besselaere in Schaerbeek, a grey Brussels suburb where the streets smelled of coal smoke and Sunday roast. His father, Romain Brel, 41 years old, co-owner of the Van Nest and Brel cardboard factory, was a tall, silent Catholic who believed that children should be seen only at mealtimes and then preferably not heard. His mother, Elizabeth Lambertine, called Lisa, 35, delicate, pious, and already defeated by life, gave birth in the marital bedroom while the maid boiled water downstairs and the priest waited in the corridor in case the baby needed immediate baptism. Jacques arrived screaming, red-faced, fists clenched, as if already furious at having been dragged into the world. The midwife said, "That one will never keep quiet." They baptized him Jacques Georges the same afternoon, because in Flanders you never wait when God might call. He grew up in a house that was large, cold, and full of prohibitions. The furniture was dark oak, the walls were covered with paintings of dead ancestors, the clocks ticked like judges. There were two brothers, Pierre, 6 years older, already the heir, and later a sister who died at birth and whose name was never spoken again. Jacques learned early that emotions were vulgar and that the only acceptable feelings were duty and fear of God. At 7 he was sent to the Institut St. Louis, a Jesuit school where the priests beat Latin into him and told him that pleasure was the devil's signature. He spent recesses hiding in the toilets writing poems on cigarette papers that he then swallowed so no one would find them. At 10 he discovered the harmonium in the school chapel and played forbidden melodies with one finger while the brother in charge slept. At 12 he was already tall, thin, angular, with burning black eyes and a nose that looked like it had been broken by life before life had even started. The war came when he was 11. Brussels fell in 18 days. The Germans requisitioned the factory. Romain Brel collaborated just enough to keep the machines running and the family fed. Jacques learned to recognize the sound of boots in the corridor and the difference between a knock that meant bread and a knock that meant danger. He spent nights in the cellar listening to the BBC on a crystal set hidden in a biscuit tin, whispering, "London calling like a prayer." He wrote his first real song at 14, a hymn to a Belgium that no longer existed, and sang it to his mother in the kitchen while she peeled potatoes and cried without knowing why. At 17 he was forced to work at the factory. He spent his days cutting cardboard, counting boxes, wearing a gray overall that smelled of glue and shame. He hated it with a violence that frightened even him. He wrote poems on the back of invoices, hid them in the toilet cistern, and at night escaped to the boîtes of the Morals where old accordionists played musette and drunk workers sang about love and death. He married Therese Michielsen, Michi, on June 1, 1950 because she was pregnant and because his father threatened to disown him if he didn't do the right thing. She was 20, gentle, Catholic, and already resigned. Their daughter Chantal was born in December. Jacques looked at the baby and felt nothing but terror. He promised Michi he would stay. He lied. In 1953, at 24, he recorded his first record at his own expense. 9 songs, pressed in 200 copies, paid for by selling his motorbike. He sent one to Jacques Canetti, the legendary talent scout of the Trois Baudets in Paris. Canetti listened, shrugged, and said, "Come to Paris. We'll see." Jacques took the train with a cardboard suitcase, a guitar older than he was, and 40 francs in his pocket. Michi stayed in Brussels with Chantal and a second daughter, France, born in 1951. He promised to send money. He promised to come back. He never really did either. Paris was cold, hungry, and magnificent. He slept in attics, ate bread and cheese, sang in cabarets where the owners paid him in soup and insults. Canetti booked him at the Trois Baudets as the opening act for 10 minutes. The first night he walked on stage in a suit too big, hair slicked back, eyes like burning coals, and sang La Haine with a violence that made the room freeze. The audience booed. He came back the next night and sang Il peut pleuvoir and made them cry. By the third night they were shouting his name. He never looked back. The 1950s were fire and ascension. He wrote at night, chain-smoking, drinking cognac mixed with coffee, tearing up 20 versions before keeping one. He wrote Quand on n'est que l'amour, ne me quitte pas, le plat pays, Les Bourgeois, Madeleine, Amsterdam, Les Flamands, La Chanson de Vieux Amants, Mathilde, Les Vieux, Ces Gensla. He wrote as if someone were tearing the words out of his guts with red-hot tongs. He recorded them in studios that smelled of Gauloise and panic, singing until his throat bled, until the sound engineers begged him to stop because the tape was saturated with emotion. He toured relentlessly: Switzerland, Holland, Algeria, Morocco, Canada, the Soviet Union. He filled the Bobino, the Olympia, the Alhambra. He screamed, spat, sweated, wept on stage, threw chairs, broke microphones, made love to the audience with a violence that left them trembling. He lived like a man who knew he was going to die young. He drank a bottle of whiskey a day, smoked 80 cigarettes, slept 3 hours a night, made love to anything that moved and some things that didn't. He left Michi in 1958. They never divorced, just stopped living together. He loved madly Bamy, a young Guyanese dancer he met in 1967, with a tenderness that terrified him. He bought a house in Molenbeek, a chateau in Normandy, an apartment on the Isle St. Louis, a boat in Antibes. He filled them with dogs, children, a third daughter, Isabelle, born in 1958 to a mistress, and ghosts. He acted. François Truffaut gave him the lead in Les Enfants du Paradis. He refused because he was afraid of the camera. Claude Lelouch gave him a small role in Laventia c'est Laventia. He played opposite Lino Ventura in Le Murder and stole every scene with a mixture of fury and despair. He directed 2 films, Franz and Le Far West, that were beautiful failures because he refused to compromise. He flew planes. He got his pilot's license in 1962 and crashed 3 times without ever being seriously hurt. He sailed. He crossed the Atlantic alone in 1975 on his boat Ascoe and nearly died in a storm off the Azores. Cancer came in 1974. They removed half a lung. He spat blood into handkerchiefs and kept singing. He moved to the Marquesas Islands in 1975, bought a house in Atuana on Hiva Oa, a few meters from Gauguin's grave, and lived there with madly like a man who had already died once and was waiting for the second time. He learned to fish, to speak Marquesan, to be silent. He flew his own plane between the islands, bringing medicine, mail, and songs to people who had never heard of Europe. He recorded one last album, Les Marquesas, in 1977, singing with a voice that sounded like gravel soaked in honey. He came back to Paris in 1978 to die properly. He recorded one final song, Orly, about 2 lovers separating at the airport, and sang it as if he were the one leaving forever. On October 9, 1978, he died at 4:10 a.m. in the hospital of Bobigny, aged 49 years and 6 months. Madly was holding his hand. He weighed 38 kilos. His last words were, "Je veux rentrer chez moi. I want to go home." They buried him in Atuana, 3 meters from Gauguin, facing the sea. The grave is simple: a stone, his name, the dates, and a bronze relief of his face screaming. He left 3 daughters who loved him and hated him in equal measure, a country, Belgium, that never quite knew what to do with him, another country, France, that adopted him as a national treasure, and a world that still sings his songs in bars, in showers, in demonstrations, in funerals. His records have sold more than 200 million copies. His plays are still performed. His voice, that voice that sounded like a man being torn apart from the inside, still makes strong men weep on the metro. Jacques Brel was not a singer. He was a volcano that learned to speak. He fought his demons every day of his life and lost every battle except the last one, because in the end he managed to die exactly as he had lived, screaming, in love, untamed, unforgettable. And somewhere, in the wind that blows across the Pacific or in the rain that falls on Brussels, you can still hear him roar, "Ne me quitte pas," like a man who knows that no one ever really leaves.